The wind rolled across the high plains of Montana like a restless spirit, stirring dust devils along the long white fence lines of the McAllister Ranch. Cattle grazed in the distance, and the sun hung low, turning the sky a deep orange. It should have been a peaceful evening, but for Evelyn Brooks, it was the day her life was bartered away. At 19, she stood on the porch of her father's small weather-beaten farmhouse, the paint peeling and the windows rattling in their frames. Inside, voices rose. Her father's desperate and angry, the sheriff's stern and cold, and the voice that frightened her most, the deep, calm baritone of Charles McAllister. Charles was a man of 50, owner of the largest ranch in 3 counties, and a millionaire many times over. Men feared him, banks respected him, politicians bowed to him, and Evelyn had barely spoken to him in her entire life. She knew her father had debts. Gambling, drink, bad cattle trades, everyone in town knew. But no one told her the truth until today. Her mother found her at the table that morning, hands trembling, face pale. "Evelyn," she whispered, "your father made a deal. To pay his debts, he's agreed to marry you to Charles McAllister." For a moment, Evelyn had forgotten how to breathe. She tried to laugh, but the sound died in her throat. "But I don't even know him," she stammered. "He knows you," her mother said softly. "He's watched you grow up. Said you're respectable, hard-working, quiet." As if she were a horse being evaluated before auction. Now, as she stood outside, she heard the voices inside rise again. "She's not a commodity, McAllister," her father barked. "You signed the contract," McAllister replied. His tone remained calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "And a man honors his signature." The sheriff spoke next. "Brooks, the law's clear. You owe McAllister $48,000. You can't pay with land or cattle, you sold those off already. Marriage fulfills the settlement." Evelyn's fingers tightened on the porch railing. She could run, she could try, she could disappear before they noticed. But where would she go? A lone girl on the frontier didn't last long. The front door swung open, and Charles McAllister stepped outside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black coat and tailored vest rather than ranch clothes. His hat cast a shadow over sharp eyes that missed nothing. Evelyn straightened. He looked at her, not hungrily, not cruelly, but with the calm study of a man who had already decided how a situation would end. "Miss Brooks," he said, tipping his hat, "I apologize for the circumstances. But I assure you, you will be well cared for." Evelyn swallowed. "I didn't choose this," she whispered. "Neither did I," he replied quietly. "But I keep my word. And I expect others to do the same." Before she could answer, the sheriff stepped out behind him. "The wedding will be held tomorrow evening. At the McAllister estate." Evelyn felt the world fall away. Tomorrow. Her childhood would end in less than 24 hours. The next morning dawned cold and silver, the sky washed pale by a thin layer of clouds. Evelyn Brooks didn't sleep. She had spent the night staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind and the sound of her mother crying softly in the next room. By sunrise, her few belongings were folded into a worn leather suitcase, 2 dresses, a ribbon, and a family Bible. She stood at the gate of the farm as a black McAllister carriage approached, wheels crunching over the dirt road. It wasn't Charles himself who arrived, but his foreman, an older cowboy named Reed Talbot. He tipped his hat, his expression heavy with sympathy. "Miss Brooks," he said quietly, "Mr. McAllister asked me to bring you." Evelyn nodded, though her stomach twisted. Her father stood on the porch, arms crossed, not looking at her. Guilt clung to him like dust, but pride held him in place. He couldn't even say goodbye. Her mother, eyes red, hurried to her and gripped her hands. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered. "And sometimes, a cage is only a cage if you stop looking for the door." Evelyn swallowed hard. Reed helped her into the carriage, placed her suitcase beside her, and shut the door. As the horses pulled away, Evelyn took one last look at the farmhouse, its chipped paint and crooked chimney, and wondered if she'd ever see it again. The journey to the McAllister estate was long and silent, carrying her deeper into a world she had never known. The farther they rode, the grander the land became. Fenced pastures stretched endlessly, horses ran in the distance, herds worth more than Evelyn's family could ever dream of. Reed finally spoke. "Charles is a fair man," he said, eyes forward. "But people fear him because he doesn't bend. He's lost too much to do that anymore." Evelyn turned to him. "You think I'll be safe there?" Reed hesitated, too long for comfort. "You won't be harmed," he said at last. "But living with a man like Charles McAllister, that isn't easy." Evelyn sat back, clutching her hands in her lap. "I don't want his money, or his name," she murmured. Reed nodded, not unkindly. "Maybe, but stand tall. He respects backbone more than beauty." Around noon, the carriage crested a hill, and Evelyn drew a breath. The McAllister mansion rose in the distance. 3 floors of red stone, white-pillared porches, and sweeping veranda balconies overlooking the range. It looked less like a home and more like a courthouse built to judge the world. Workers stopped to stare as the carriage rolled through the iron gates. Some whispered, others shook their heads in pity or envy. To them, she wasn't a bride. She was a payment. At the entrance, the doors swung open, and there he stood, Charles McAllister himself, dressed in dark coat and vest, hands behind his back. Evelyn stepped down, spine straight, refusing to tremble. He watched her with that calm, unreadable gaze. "Welcome to your new home, Miss Brooks," he said. She met his eyes and answered quietly. "It is not my home yet." For the first time, something flickered in his expression, not anger, but interest. He nodded once. "We shall see." The mansion was grand, impossibly large for a young girl who had grown up in a single-room farmhouse. The halls stretched endlessly, lined with dark oak panels and portraits of stern McAllisters long gone. Every step Evelyn took echoed against the polished floors, a reminder that she was a small, fragile figure in a world built for power and wealth. Her room overlooked the sprawling pastures, sunlight glinting off the distant cattle pens. The bed was enormous, draped in heavy linens and silks that smelled faintly of lavender. She ran her hand across the quilted surface, as if touching the fabric could make this surreal reality more bearable. Charles McAllister did not join her that evening. Dinner had been silent, the staff respectful and efficient, and by the time the clock chimed 8, Evelyn found herself alone. She wandered to the window, gazing out at the horizon, the wind tugging at her hair, carrying the faint scent of hay and horses. It was then that she realized the depth of her isolation. Married in name, yet treated as if she were invisible. A life built on survival had placed her here, in a gilded cage of wealth and authority, where her feelings mattered little. A knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find the housekeeper, Mrs. Ellery, a kind woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun. "Miss Brooks," she said gently, "I brought some tea. Mr. McAllister requested you rest. He said you would have your own schedule, your own life here, but he will require your presence for breakfast." Evelyn nodded silently, accepting the steaming cup. The warmth seeped into her hands, and for a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a life where her choices mattered. But the moment passed. After Mrs. Ellery left, Evelyn sat by the window, staring at the expanse of land. She thought of her father, sick and frail, and how her obedience had secured a few more months for him. She thought of her mother's eyes, brimming with unspoken apologies. And she thought of Charles, tall, imposing, enigmatic, who had claimed her future with a calmness that left her both awed and afraid. Night fell, and shadows stretched across the room. Evelyn lay in the vast bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart heavy. She wondered what kind of husband Charles would be. Would he be cruel, cold, indifferent? Or could there be a glimmer of something more, compassion, understanding, even warmth? Outside, the wind whispered through the eaves, as if carrying the voices of a world she had left behind. And in that whisper, Evelyn felt a faint spark of defiance. She would survive, she would endure, and perhaps, just perhaps, she would find her own place in this mansion, not as a possession, but as a person. The night stretched on, long and quiet. Charles McAllister remained distant, a shadow in the halls. Evelyn closed her eyes, knowing that the real challenge, the negotiation of hearts, wills, and trust, was only beginning. The following morning, Evelyn awoke to the sound of horses stamping in the courtyard below. Sunlight streamed through her tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. She dressed quickly, the silk of her gown brushing against her skin, a reminder of the life she had been thrust into. Downstairs, the grand dining hall awaited, polished and vast. Evelyn entered quietly, expecting to find Charles seated at the head of the table, but the chair remained empty. Only the staff moved about, placing silverware and arranging plates with quiet efficiency. It was as if the mansion itself held its breath, waiting for some sign of command from its master. She poured herself tea and tried not to let the silence crush her. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant echo of a horse's neigh, seemed amplified. It was a house built on authority, precision, and control, and she was acutely aware that she had none. After breakfast, she wandered the halls, running her fingers along the carved banisters, peering into rooms filled with books, maps, and artifacts collected over generations. Everything spoke of legacy and power, two things she had never possessed. A knock at the door of the study caught her attention. The heavy wooden panels swung open, revealing Charles standing by the desk, quill in hand, working over a stack of ledgers. His eyes lifted briefly, measuring her, evaluating her presence. "Good morning," Evelyn said cautiously. "Good morning," he replied, his tone polite but distant. "You are free to explore the house, but please refrain from entering the private study." Evelyn nodded, pretending not to notice the tension that coiled in his voice. She left the room and descended to the library, where she found shelves stacked high with leather-bound volumes. She ran her fingers along the spines, feeling the weight of history and knowledge. It was impressive, overwhelming, and utterly foreign. As the day wore on, Evelyn realized that her life would be defined by the spaces between them, the rooms, the hallways, the silent meals. Charles was never cruel, never dismissive, he simply existed in a manner that demanded distance. By late afternoon, a storm began to gather on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled across the sky, and the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Evelyn watched, fascinated and apprehensive, as the storm threatened the pastures and the stables. For the first time, she considered stepping outside, despite the growing tempest. She felt a strange pull, an urge to witness the land that Charles commanded, the life that had become hers overnight. As lightning forked across the sky, she realized something. This house, this man, this unexpected marriage, it would challenge her, test her courage, and force her to discover a strength she hadn't yet known she possessed. And in the distance, beneath the darkening clouds, Charles appeared, on horseback, surveying the land. His figure was imposing, commanding, yet strangely human in the softening light of the storm. Evelyn watched, understanding that her journey had only begun, and that the road to his trust, and perhaps something deeper, would be long and uncertain. The storm broke in earnest the following morning, sheets of rain pounding against the mansion's windows and the wide expanse of the McAllister pastures. Horses neighed and stamped as the wind whipped through the corrals, and the distant rumble of thunder shook the ground beneath Evelyn's feet. Charles McAllister moved with precision and authority, riding out into the tempest to check the fences along the northern boundary, ensuring that the cattle were secure. Evelyn watched from the veranda, a mixture of fear and fascination settling in her chest. She knew the land was treacherous during storms, yet she could not tear her eyes away from the man who had claimed her future. She descended the steps and called to him, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Charles, let me help." He paused in the saddle, turning his head slightly. The rain plastered his dark hair to his forehead, his coat soaked, yet his posture remained unyielding. "This is dangerous," he shouted. "I've worked on my family's ranch all my life," she replied, her determination cutting through the storm. "I'm not afraid." For a long moment, he regarded her silently, measuring her resolve. Then, with a curt nod, he gestured for her to follow. Evelyn mounted the second horse, her fingers tightening around the reins. The wind tore at her gown, the rain stung her face, and the earth beneath them became a slippery hazard, but she pressed on, keeping pace with him. They arrived at a broken fence where several cattle were pushing against the loose boards, anxious and confused. Charles dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud, and began to repair the fence with practiced efficiency. Evelyn followed, lifting beams and tying ropes with hands that had never been so cold or so muddy. A gust of wind knocked a post loose, sending it tumbling toward Charles. Without thinking, Evelyn lunged, pushing him aside just in time. They both tumbled into the mud, soaked and exhausted, yet the danger had passed. Charles looked at her, rain dripping from his hat, eyes wide for the first time. "You could have been hurt," he exclaimed, though the edge in his voice was tempered by concern. "So could you," she shot back, chest heaving. Their gazes locked, and for a fleeting moment, the barriers of their formal relationship seemed to dissolve in the storm's fury. They worked together to secure the herd, shouting over the wind, their movements synchronized. When the last post held and the cattle had calmed, Charles extended a hand to help her to her feet. Evelyn took it, the contact brief but electric, a silent acknowledgement of shared strength. As they rode back toward the mansion, soaked and tired, Charles finally spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "You are remarkable, Evelyn. Stronger than I expected." She smiled faintly, tired but triumphant. "And you're not as untouchable as the town believes." He looked at her for a moment, the wind tousling his hair, and said nothing. But the expression in his eyes betrayed the smallest crack in his carefully constructed walls. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and silent, but inside, something unspoken had shifted. Evelyn had survived the first test, and in doing so, had earned the first spark of recognition from the man who held her fate in his hands. By mid-morning, the storm had passed, leaving a silver sheen on the pastures and droplets clinging to every leaf, fence post, and horse's coat. The air smelled of wet earth and fresh grass, and the ranch seemed to exhale after the tension of the tempest. Evelyn, dripping and tired, dismounted near the main house, her boots caked in mud. Charles was already there, brushing down his horse, his expression unreadable. Yet there was a softness in the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. "You didn't have to come with me," he said, voice low. "Most would have stayed inside, safe and dry." "I could not watch you face the storm alone," Evelyn replied. "And I can handle myself. You should know that by now." He regarded her for a long moment, as if weighing the truth in her words. Then he nodded. "Very well, you are stronger than I assumed. That is good." It was the first hint of acknowledgement beyond mere courtesy, a tiny crack in the walls he had built around himself. Evelyn felt a strange warmth, a spark of hope that perhaps their marriage need not be only formal, that perhaps respect could become something more. Mrs. Ellery arrived with towels and warm tea. Evelyn wrapped herself in one, feeling the heat seep into her chilled bones. Charles, for his part, declined the tea but lingered nearby, leaning against the railing as he surveyed the cattle. There was a quiet companionship in the shared silence, an understanding that words could not yet capture. Evelyn returned to the veranda later that afternoon, drying her hair and gown in the sun. She reflected on the events of the storm, realizing she had not only survived physically but had also earned a measure of recognition from her husband, a gesture more valuable than anything gold could buy. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields. Charles approached her quietly, his boots crunching in the gravel. He stopped a few feet away, eyes on the horizon. "You work well," he said simply. "I had good instruction," Evelyn replied, smiling faintly. His gaze lingered, and for the first time, Evelyn noticed a subtle shift, a hesitation, a humanizing pause that had been absent before. Charles McAllister, the man everyone feared, the man who had seemed untouchable, was capable of noticing and valuing her. As evening fell, the mansion's windows glowed with warm light. Evelyn prepared for dinner, her thoughts heavy with the day's events. For the first time since the forced marriage, she felt a cautious optimism. Trust was not yet born, but the seed had been planted. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that the coming days would challenge them both. The walls of formality, distance, and fear were still high, but she had crossed the first threshold, proving that she was no longer just a girl at the mercy of circumstance. She was a participant in her own life. Charles entered the dining hall quietly, taking his usual place. Yet his eyes met hers across the table with something unspoken. The acknowledgement lingered, a silent promise that this marriage might evolve, slowly, into something more than survival. And in that moment, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine what that could mean. While Evelyn worked to navigate the mansion and the cautious recognition she had earned from Charles, the town of Willow Creek buzzed with curiosity and judgment. Small towns were fertile ground for gossip, and the sudden marriage of the young, penniless girl to the powerful McAllister was fuel enough to set tongues wagging for weeks. At the mercantile, shopkeepers whispered over bolts of fabric. "Did you hear?" said Mrs. Dalton, adjusting her apron. "The Brooks girl married McAllister? Just like that? Bought herself a mansion and a title," another replied, shaking her head. "Pity about her father's debts, but I'll wager she'll never be happy." Across the street, Cowhands at the saloon leaned over their whiskey glasses. "Boss's new bride, too young," one muttered. "He's not a man known for softness." The words stung when Evelyn heard them later, delivering supplies for her father. She had learned to ignore the stares, the whispers, the pity or envy. But it was impossible not to notice that the world around her had already judged her as if she were nothing more than a commodity exchanged for financial gain. Yet as she rode back to the mansion, thoughts of the storm with Charles flared in her mind. For the first time, she had felt a hint of connection, an acknowledgement that she was capable, brave, and not invisible. The memory strengthened her resolve, a quiet defiance in the face of public scorn. At the mansion, she found Charles in the study, examining papers and making calculations for the upcoming cattle drives. He looked up briefly as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Evelyn," he said, voice steady, "I hear whispers about town opinions." She tensed. Had he overheard the judgment? "I've learned to ignore them," she said. "They don't define me, or you." He regarded her silently. Then, unexpectedly, he allowed the faintest hint of a smile to touch his lips. "Good. Then you understand what it means to survive in this world. Perception rarely matches reality." Evelyn felt a small surge of pride. For the first time, Charles spoke to her not as a dependent, not as a ward or a responsibility, but as an equal in understanding. Evening came, and the mansion glowed under the setting sun. Evelyn walked the veranda, letting the breeze dry the dampness of her clothes, and thought of her father, her town, and the impossible position in which she had been placed. Yet she refused to see herself as a victim. She had survived storms, physical labor, and fear, and now she had survived Charles McAllister's scrutiny, too. That night, as she prepared for bed, she tied the blue ribbon her father had given her into her hair. It was a reminder of where she came from, of the sacrifices made for her survival, and of the strength that had carried her into this new life. Somewhere in the mansion, Charles paused in the hall, listening to the quiet rhythm of her room. The acknowledgement of her bravery, her determination, and her spirit was stirring something within him, an unfamiliar, human recognition that slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to soften his heart. The world outside whispered and judged, but within the walls of McAllister Mansion, a slow, quiet transformation had begun, one that neither Evelyn nor Charles could yet fully understand. A week after the storm, the McAllister estate was buzzing with unusual activity. Charles had summoned carpenters, stable hands, and a few trusted ranch managers to the main yard. Evelyn, curious, followed at a distance, observing the flurry of work. She wasn't sure what was happening, but a sense of anticipation settled in the air. Charles rode up beside her, boots sinking into the wet soil. His expression remained calm, unreadable, yet there was a subtle tension in his posture. Evelyn glanced at him. "What's happening?" she asked, brushing mud from her skirt. "A gift," he said simply, his voice measured. "For you." Evelyn blinked. "For me?" He nodded, dismounting and leading his horse toward the stables. The workers paused briefly, exchanging knowing glances. Charles's gifts were always calculated, generous, yet deliberate, and always with meaning. They approached a newly built stable. Inside, a horse stood quietly, its coat a deep chestnut that gleamed even in the morning mist. The animal nuzzled Charles's hand, eyes bright and intelligent. Evelyn's breath caught. She had loved horses all her life, but never owned one of this caliber. Her fingers hovered over its mane, trembling slightly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Charles regarded her closely, his gaze softening. "It is yours. Consider it a token of respect and acknowledgement. You are not merely the girl I married for convenience. You are capable, brave, and deserving. I hope this horse reminds you of that." She turned to him, emotions welling up. Gratitude, surprise, even a flicker of something warmer. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied. "But I expect you to ride it. Learn its ways. Treat it well. It is a companion, not a decoration." Evelyn reached out, placing her hand on the horse's soft neck. Its warmth and steady breathing grounded her, filling a void she hadn't realized had been there. Charles watched, eyes focused, as if reading her reaction, gauging the depth of her response. For the first time since their marriage, Evelyn felt a connection that had nothing to do with survival, obligation, or public perception. She looked up at Charles, searching for his expression. There, beneath the stern exterior, she glimpsed a flicker of pride, an acknowledgement that she had endured, that she had earned more than mere survival. The townspeople would gossip, whispering about the girl who married the millionaire. They would judge, envy, and speculate. But here, on this ranch, in the presence of a man who rarely showed vulnerability, Evelyn had received a gift that transcended wealth. It was trust. And that night, as she brushed the horse in the soft glow of lanterns, Evelyn understood that the road ahead, though fraught with challenges, might also hold unexpected moments of kindness, respect, and even affection. Charles, watching from a distance, turned back toward the mansion. He did not speak, but the small nod he gave himself reflected a silent acknowledgement. He was beginning to see her not as a duty, but as a partner in spirit. The world outside could whisper, but inside, a quiet understanding was forming, a foundation upon which something far greater than obligation could grow. The days that followed the gift of the chestnut horse carried a new rhythm. Evelyn awoke each morning eager to ride, to explore the endless pastures, and to feel the wind against her face as the horse galloped freely across the fields. The animal's trust in her mirrored her growing confidence, and in turn, her courage softened the rigid lines of Charles McAllister's demeanor. Despite this progress, the mansion remained largely silent. Meals were formal, conversations sparse, and Evelyn often found herself alone with her thoughts in the vast hallways. Yet she noticed subtle shifts in Charles, small gestures that hinted at a thawing. A brief glance, a nod of approval, the faintest suggestion of concern when a storm threatened the livestock. One evening, after a long ride, Evelyn returned to find Charles in the library, papers spread across a large desk. He looked up as she entered. "Good evening," he said, voice neutral yet carrying a softness she hadn't heard before. "Good evening," she replied, setting down her riding gloves. The room smelled faintly of leather and ink, a comforting scent of diligence and discipline. He gestured toward a chair. "Sit," he said. Evelyn obeyed, noting the unusual invitation. Charles had never extended such familiarity. "There is something I must tell you," he began, eyes focused on her rather than the papers. "You have earned more than respect through the week. I have observed your courage, your composure, and the way you face challenges head-on." Evelyn felt her pulse quicken. She had not expected such acknowledgement, and the weight of his words pressed upon her. "You are no longer just my wife by contract," he continued, his voice quieter now, reflective. "You are someone whose presence I value, and I wish to make that clear." Her breath caught. The words, so rare from Charles McAllister, settled over her like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. She wanted to speak, to thank him, to express the swell of emotion in her chest, but the right words refused to come. Instead, she simply nodded, letting the quiet speak for her. Charles's gaze softened, and for the first time, Evelyn sensed the man behind the walls of authority. He had endured loss, disappointment, and betrayal, yet here he was, offering a piece of himself to someone he had once regarded as merely a responsibility. The moment lingered, unbroken by the clatter of servants or the demands of ranch life. It was rare, fragile, and entirely theirs. Evelyn realized that the foundation of trust, respect, and perhaps affection had been laid, not in grand declarations, but in subtle recognition of strength and character. As she left the library, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. Evelyn paused on the veranda, looking out over the vast expanse of land that now symbolized both her captivity and her growing independence. She mounted her horse and rode across the fields, heart lightened by hope. She had survived storms, judgment, and the weight of expectation. And now, the hardest part of all, breaking through the walls of a man's guarded heart, was beginning. Somewhere in the distance, Charles watched, silent and contemplative, knowing that this fragile bridge between them was the first step toward a marriage that could transcend obligation and perhaps become something extraordinary. The morning of the small celebration arrived like a gentle whisper. Word had spread quietly through Willow Creek that the McAllister estate would host a private reception for Evelyn's coming of age, a modest gathering, though the wealth and prestige of the household made it impossible to go unnoticed. Townsfolk had gathered along the main road, curiosity etched on every face, eager to witness the young bride in her new world. Evelyn stood in her room, adjusting the simple gown she had chosen herself. She tied the pale blue ribbon her father had given her into her hair, a symbol of resilience, love, and survival. The gown was plain, elegant in its simplicity, and yet it radiated dignity that the finest silks could never imitate. Charles appeared quietly at the doorway. His usual formality softened by a rare, almost hesitant smile. He gestured toward the chestnut horse in the yard. Evelyn's eyes widened, then softened with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. "It is for you," he said simply. "A companion, yes, but also a promise. That you will be seen and respected here, not merely as my wife in name, but as an equal in spirit and courage." The gathered townsfolk murmured as Evelyn rode forward on the horse, posture regal yet unpretentious. The breeze caught the ribbon in her hair, sunlight glinting off the polished leather and chestnut coat. Even the skeptical eyes of those who had whispered judgment now softened in admiration. Charles approached, standing tall, dignified, but not distant. He lifted a small, intricately carved box from his coat pocket and handed it to Evelyn. She opened it slowly, revealing a delicate silver pendant with a blue gemstone, the color of her ribbon, her courage, and the hope she carried from her father's gift. "You have endured more than most, Evelyn," he said quietly. "You have proven strength, grace, and heart. This is for you, for all that you are, and for all that we might become, together." A hush fell over the crowd. The murmurs ceased. Even those who had doubted her, mocked her, or pitied her now watched in stunned silence. The combination of her poise, her bravery, and Charles's acknowledgement had silenced every tongue. Evelyn looked into his eyes and saw something she had not dared hope for, a respect that hinted at affection, a recognition that she was more than a bride purchased out of necessity. She reached out, letting her hand brush against his, a gesture unspoken yet infinitely meaningful. As she turned back to the town's spectators, they understood. She was no longer a girl caught in the tides of circumstance. She was a woman of strength, dignity, and spirit. And she was seen, truly seen. Charles McAllister watched her, the hard lines of his face softened, the weight of authority balanced by a newfound warmth. The gift, the horse, the pendant, they were symbols, yes, but also bridges. Bridges that connected two lives previously separated by fear, duty, and misunderstanding. That day, in the sunlit yard of McAllister Estate, Evelyn rode through the whispers and glares of a small town, carrying herself with a confidence that could not be bought or borrowed. The wedding gift, thoughtful, meaningful, and entirely personal, had done what no words, contracts, or laws ever could. It had silenced the town, and opened the first door to a marriage built not on obligation, but on respect, trust, and the quiet beginnings of love.